The wrench slipped from Warren Briggs's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the metal floor. He cursed under his breath and bent down to pick it up, his knees protesting with every movement. 67 years of life, 40 of them spent working on ships and machines, had left their mark on his body. His back ached constantly now and his hands shook more than they used to. Warren straightened up and looked around his workshop. Piles of broken machinery surrounded him on all sides. Circuit boards, engine parts, navigation systems, all of them damaged beyond normal repair. But normal didn't mean much out here in the Rust Basin scrapyard. He had learned to make the impossible possible, mostly because he had nothing else to do with his time. 23 years. That's how long he had been living alone on Dorian's Edge, a forgotten planet on the outer rim of known space. The mining colony had shut down back then, and everyone else had left on the last transport ships. Warren had stayed behind. He told himself it was because someone needed to maintain the equipment, but the truth was simpler. He had nowhere else to go. The scrapyard stretched out for 200 square miles in every direction. Broken starships jutted out of the red soil like the bones of ancient creatures. Failed colony equipment rusted in heaps taller than buildings. Technology from dozens of alien civilizations lay scattered and forgotten, waiting for someone to find value in the wreckage. Warren made his living by salvaging parts and selling them to the occasional trader who passed through the system. Sometimes he went 3 months without seeing another living soul. He walked over to the corner of his workshop where 5 robots stood in various states of disrepair. He had named each of them, given them personalities in his mind. There was Big Red, a loading robot with only one functional arm. Next to him stood Squeaker, a medical unit that beeped constantly because of a damaged voice module. The others had names too, all of them equally broken, all of them silent companions in his lonely existence. Warren pressed a button on Big Red's chest panel. The robot's optical sensors flickered to life for a moment, then died again. He had been trying to fix the power core for 6 months now without success. Still, he kept trying. What else was there to do? Outside the workshop, the wind howled across the scrapyard. Dust devils danced between the piles of wreckage, and the sky had turned a sickly green color. A storm was coming, and from the looks of it, a bad one. Warren sealed the workshop doors and made his way to his living quarters, a converted cargo container that he had insulated and furnished over the years. His dinner consisted of vegetables from his small greenhouse dome and a protein bar that tasted like cardboard. He ate alone at a table built from old ship panels, staring at the wall where photographs hung in cheap frames. His wife Sarah smiled at him from one picture, her face frozen in time from 30 years ago. She had died from a colony plague before they ever made it to Dorian's Edge. In another photo, his daughter Patricia stood next to him at her graduation. That had been 20 years back, maybe more. He had lost count. Patricia had sent him messages for a while after he stayed behind on Dorian's Edge. Then the messages had stopped coming about 5 years ago. Warren didn't know if she was dead or if she had simply given up on him. Both possibilities hurt equally, so he tried not to think about either one. After dinner, Warren played an old audio recording. Sarah's voice filled the small room, talking about ordinary things from their life together, what she wanted to plant in their garden, which friends they should visit, what color to paint the kitchen. Warren had listened to this recording thousands of times. He knew every word, every pause, every breath. It was pathetic, he knew, but it made him feel less alone. The storm hit around midnight. Lightning split the sky in brilliant purple flashes and thunder shook the ground. Warren lay in his bunk and watched the light show through his small window. He had seen hundreds of storms on Dorian's Edge, but this one felt different somehow. More violent, more angry than he saw them. 3 bright streaks of fire cutting through the clouds, falling fast toward the northern section of the scrapyard. They weren't meteors, the trajectory was all wrong. They looked more like ships losing power, trying desperately to control their descent. The objects hit the ground hard enough to shake Warren's container. 3 massive booms echoed across the scrapyard, followed by the sound of tearing metal and collapsing structures. Warren sat up in his bunk, his heart racing. Salvage. Something valuable had just fallen right into his lap. He pulled on his work boots and grabbed his jacket. He strapped his plasma cutter to his belt and picked up his investigation kit, a battered toolbox full of scanning equipment and basic tools. Whatever had crashed out there might be worth something, and he couldn't afford to let it sit until morning when other scavengers might show up. The rain hit him like a wall the moment he stepped outside. Cold water soaked through his jacket in seconds, and the wind nearly knocked him off his feet. Warren pulled his hood up and started walking north, following the emergency lights he had installed throughout the scrapyard years ago. Lightning provided additional illumination, turning the landscape into a nightmare of twisted metal and deep shadows. It took him 40 minutes to reach the first crash site. The rain had started to ease up a bit, turning from a downpour into a steady drizzle. Warren climbed over a pile of broken hull plating and looked down into a massive crater. What he saw made him freeze in place. It wasn't a ship. It was a creature, and it was massive. The being measured at least 30 feet from nose to tail, with scales that shimmered deep red even while covered in mud and blood. Wings, torn and broken, lay crumpled against its sides. 4 powerful legs ended in claws that had dug deep furrows in the ground. The head was reptilian but intelligent, with ridges and horns that spoke of something ancient and majestic. Warren had seen a lot of alien species in his 40 years of space travel, but nothing like this. His mind went back to childhood, to old Earth broadcasts his parents had shown him. Dragons. The creature looked exactly like the dragons from ancient human mythology, except this one was real and it was dying. He approached carefully, his plasma cutter ready just in case. The creature's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Blood pooled beneath its body, mixing with the rainwater. As Warren got closer, one massive eye opened and focused on him. The eye was intelligent, aware, and full of pain. The dragon made a sound, low and rumbling. It wasn't quite a roar, more like a plea. Warren felt something in his chest tighten. He thought about walking away, about returning to his workshop and pretending he had never seen this. The smart thing would be to let nature take its course. This creature was clearly dangerous, clearly not his problem. But Warren Briggs had been alone for 23 years, and loneliness does strange things to a person. He looked at the dying creature and saw something that needed help, something that didn't want to die alone in the mud and rain. He understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. He knelt down next to the dragon's head and placed his hand on its scales. They were surprisingly warm despite the cold rain. The creature's eye followed his movement, watching him with what might have been hope or might have been resignation. Warren wasn't sure which. 2 more crash sites waited in the distance, 2 more creatures probably in the same condition as this one. Every practical instinct told Warren to leave, to go back to his safe workshop and his broken robots and his lonely existence. But something deeper, something he thought had died years ago, made him stay. He stood up and looked around at the wreckage. This was going to be the hardest repair job of his life, and he had no idea if it was even possible. But he was going to try anyway because trying was better than giving up. Warren Briggs had given up on a lot of things over the past 2 decades. He decided right then, standing in the rain next to a dying dragon, that he wasn't going to give up on this. 3 days had passed since the storm, and Warren had barely slept. His entire body screamed for rest, but every time he tried to close his eyes, he thought about the 3 creatures depending on him. He had managed to drag all of them into a converted cargo container near his workshop. It had taken every bit of strength he possessed and several improvised pulley systems, but he had done it. The largest dragon, the red female, lay against the far wall. Warren had started calling her Red in his mind, though he suspected she had a real name he couldn't pronounce. Her wing had been shattered in the crash, bones broken in multiple places. He had used ship hull plating to create splints, wrapping them carefully and securing them with medical tape meant for humans. It probably wouldn't hold forever, but it might give the bones time to start healing. The blue-black male dragon occupied the middle section of the container. Warren called him Blue. A plasma weapon had punched a hole clean through his shoulder, the wound still oozing despite Warren's attempts to seal it. He had packed the injury with antibacterial gel and wrapped it in synthetic bandages. The dragon's breathing remained steady but shallow, and his scales felt cooler than they should. The smallest dragon, barely half the size of the others, trembled constantly in the corner. Her scales gleamed gold even in the dim light of the cargo container. Warren had named her Goldie. She had internal injuries he couldn't see or properly diagnose, and the shaking worried him more than the visible wounds on the other 2. He had given her water mixed with pain medication, guessing at the dosage based on her size and hoping he wouldn't accidentally poison her. Warren stood in the center of his makeshift medical bay and wondered what he had gotten himself into. He was a mechanic, not a doctor. He fixed machines, not living creatures. But he had learned long ago that the principles weren't that different. Find what's broken, figure out how it's supposed to work, repair it as best you can. The dragons were just really complicated machines made of flesh and bone instead of metal and circuits. He had raided his entire medical supply, using up medications that were supposed to last him another decade. The pain pills alone would have kept him comfortable through his arthritis for years, but he had ground them into powder and mixed them into the water he gave the dragons. They needed it more than he did. Red stirred, her massive head lifting slightly. Warren froze, his hand moving instinctively toward the plasma cutter on his belt, but the dragon didn't attack. Instead, she looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and Warren felt something brush against his mind. It wasn't words exactly, more like feelings and images. Gratitude, confusion, a question about why he was helping them. Warren nearly fell over from the shock. The dragon was inside his head somehow, communicating directly with his thoughts. He tried to answer, forming words in his mind about doing the right thing and not wanting them to die alone. He wasn't sure if it worked until Red's eyes seemed to soften, and he felt a wave of warmth that wasn't quite physical. Over the next few hours, Warren learned more about his patients. Red shared images and feelings that told a story. They were refugees, escapees from something called the Consortium. Warren saw flashes of cages and laboratories, of dragons being studied and harvested for their biological materials. He saw ships pursuing them through space, weapons firing, and the desperate decision to dive into the storm to lose their hunters. The Consortium didn't know about Dorian's Edge or its Scrapyard. The storm had masked their landing, but Red warned him that they would eventually figure it out. The Consortium had ways of tracking their escaped specimens, biological signatures that left traces even through space. Warren had maybe 2 weeks before the ships arrived, maybe less. Blue woke up next, and his reaction was very different from Red's. The male dragon surged to his feet despite his injury, flames flickering in his throat. Warren backed away quickly, holding his hands up in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. Red made a sharp sound, something between a bark and a growl, and Blue hesitated. The two dragons communicated in a way Warren couldn't hear, but he felt the tension in the air slowly ease. Blue approached him carefully, lowering his head to Warren's level. The dragon sniffed him, and Warren tried very hard not to think about how easily those jaws could snap him in half. Then Blue's thoughts touched his mind, rougher and more direct than Red's mental voice. The dragon was testing him, trying to understand why a weak little creature would risk itself for strangers. Warren didn't have a good answer, so he just showed Blue what he had been doing for the past 3 days. The splints and bandages and medications. Blue pulled back, something like respect in his eyes. The dragon limped back to his resting spot and lay down, but Warren noticed he positioned himself between the entrance and the other 2 dragons, protecting them even while injured, even in unknown territory. Warren understood that kind of loyalty. Goldie remained the biggest concern. The young dragon barely moved, and when she did, her limbs shook so badly that Warren worried she might hurt herself. He tried everything he could think of. Different medications, different positions, even playing soft music from his old audio player. Nothing seemed to help much. On the 4th day, Warren brought them food. He had trapped several of the local animals that lived in the scrapyard, rabbit-sized creatures that had adapted to eat the strange plants that grew between the wreckage. He had cooked the meat over a small fire, unsure if dragons ate their food raw or cooked. Red took a piece carefully from his hand, her teeth never touching his skin, and swallowed it whole. Blue followed her example, though more suspiciously, but Goldie wouldn't eat at all. Warren sat down next to the young dragon and placed his hand on her scales. She was burning up with fever, her whole body radiating heat. He soaked towels in cool water and draped them over her, changing them every few minutes as they warmed up. He talked to her while he worked, telling her stories about Earth and humans and all the stupid things he had done in his life. He didn't know if she could understand him, but the sound of his voice seemed to calm her shaking a little. Red watched all of this with growing fascination. Her thoughts pressed against Warren's mind again, asking questions he could barely comprehend. Why did he care? What did he gain from helping them? Didn't he understand they were dangerous, that they could kill him without effort? Warren tried to explain about empathy and compassion, about how humans had evolved to form bonds with almost anything, even broken robots and dying dragons. Red shared her own story then, And Warren saw images that broke his heart. She showed him a beautiful world with cities built into mountains, where dragons flew freely through purple skies. She showed him a mate, a male dragon with silver scales who had died fighting the consortium ships when they first attacked. She showed him her escape with Blue, her brother, and Goldie, her daughter. 3 survivors from a world of thousands running across the galaxy with no safe place to land. Warren understood loss. He had lost his wife to disease and his daughter to distance and his whole purpose to isolation. He looked at Red and saw someone who knew the same emptiness he carried every day. They were both alone in their own ways, both broken by circumstances beyond their control. That night, Goldie finally ate. Warren had crushed the meat into a paste and mixed it with water and medicine. He fed it to her slowly, one small bite at a time, while Red hummed a sound that seemed to comfort the young dragon. Blue watched from his corner, and Warren felt the male dragon's thoughts touch his mind briefly. It was just one word, or at least one concept that translated into a word Warren could understand. Family. Warren looked at the 3 dragons in his converted cargo container and realized he had just adopted 3 incredibly dangerous, incredibly complicated creatures. They needed him, and somehow without even realizing it had happened, he needed them too. For the first time in 23 years, Warren Briggs had a reason to get up in the morning beyond simple survival. Red called him something in her mind, a concept that took him a moment to translate. Heartfire. It was a dragon word for someone who burned with inner strength, someone who acted from the core of their being rather than from logic or fear. Warren didn't feel particularly strong or brave, but Red saw him that way, and that meant something. As Warren finally allowed himself to rest that night, sleeping on the floor of the cargo container so he could monitor his patients, he heard Blue's rough thoughts one more time. The male dragon asked what would happen when the consortium arrived. Warren smiled in the darkness and sent back the only answer he had. They would fight together. Warren spread the hand-drawn map across his workbench and studied it for the 100th time. He had marked every defensive position, every weapon system, every trap he could possibly prepare in the time they had left. Red stood behind him, her massive head lowering to examine the map with interest. Her wing was healing well enough that she could move around the cargo container now, though flying remained impossible. 2 weeks. That's what Red had estimated before the consortium ships would track them down. Warren had already spent 4 days getting the dragons stable, which left him 10 days to prepare for a fight against an interstellar hunting fleet. When he thought about it too hard, the whole situation seemed completely insane. 1 old man and 3 injured dragons against professional hunters with advanced technology. The smart move would be to run, to find some transport off-world and disappear before the ships arrived. But Warren had stopped making smart moves a long time ago. Besides, the dragons couldn't fly yet, and he didn't have access to any ship that could carry creatures their size. They were stuck on Dorian's edge, and running wasn't an option. That left only one choice. They would fight, and Warren would make damn sure the consortium regretted coming here. He walked through the scrapyard with Blue limping beside him. The male dragon had insisted on joining him despite his injury, and Warren had learned that arguing with a 30-foot dragon was pointless. Together, they cataloged everything that might be useful in a fight. 23 years of collected salvage had turned the scrapyard into an unintentional armory. Warren found 4 automated turret systems from a destroyed fortress ship. They were offline and damaged, but the core components looked intact. He had Blue use his claws to dig them out of the wreckage, and together they carried the massive weapons back to his workshop. Each turret weighed nearly a ton, but Blue handled them like they were made of paper. Warren made a mental note never to make the dragon truly angry. The turrets needed power cores, targeting systems, and complete rewiring. Warren attacked the problem the same way he approached any difficult repair. Break it down into steps, fix one thing at a time, don't think about how impossible the whole job seemed. He worked through the night, his hands moving automatically through tasks he had performed thousands of times before. Red visited him in the workshop, her thoughts curious about what he was building. Warren explained about automated defenses and overlapping fields of fire. He told her about human warfare, about how humans had survived on Earth by being clever rather than strong. Humanity had fought creatures bigger, faster, and more dangerous than themselves. They had won by using their brains and their stubbornness. Red found this fascinating. She asked him to teach her about human tactics, about how they thought during battle. Warren pulled up old military files on his computer, showing her historical battles and strategic concepts. She absorbed everything with intense focus, occasionally asking questions that showed how quickly she understood. Dragons were far from stupid, Warren realized. They were just as intelligent as humans, maybe more so. Over the next few days, Warren and the dragons fell into a working rhythm. He would identify what needed to be done, and they would help him do it. Red's fire breath proved incredibly useful for welding metal. She could control the flames with precision that put his plasma torch to shame. Warren used her abilities to repair the turret mounting systems and create new defensive barriers from scrap metal. Blue, despite his injury, began digging defensive positions throughout the northern section of the scrapyard. His claws tore through the hard soil and rock like it was soft clay. He created trenches and berms that would force any ground assault into predictable paths. Warren showed him where to dig, and Blue executed the work with military efficiency that suggested dragons understood warfare very well. Even Goldie helped, once she regained her strength. The young dragon was small enough to crawl into spaces Warren couldn't reach, running wires through narrow passages and installing sensor equipment in hidden locations. She treated the whole thing like a game, chattering excitedly in Warren's mind about each successful installation. Her enthusiasm reminded Warren of his daughter at that age, always eager to help with projects even when she didn't fully understand them. Warren reactivated an old minefield he had salvaged years ago. The mines were designed to detect pressure and movement, and he spread them across the most likely approach routes. He marked their locations carefully on his map, because the last thing he needed was to blow himself up with his own defenses. Blue helped him place the larger mines, the ones designed to disable armored vehicles. The sensor network came together piece by piece. Warren installed motion detectors, heat sensors, and optical cameras throughout the scrapyard. He routed everything through his workshop computer, creating a central monitoring station where he could track any movement within 2 miles of his position. The system was crude compared to military-grade equipment, but it would give him advance warning, and that might make all the difference. Red suggested using reflective panels to confuse enemy sensors. She showed Warren mental images of how consortium hunters tracked their targets, using biological signatures and heat patterns. If they could create false readings or blind spots, they might slow down the enemy advance. Warren loved the idea. He spent an entire day positioning old solar panels and polished metal sheets throughout the scrapyard, creating a maze of sensor dead zones and false readings. On the 7th day, Warren found a functional shield generator in an old luxury yacht that had crashed years ago. The yacht had belonged to some alien diplomat, and the shield system was far more advanced than anything the mining colony had used. The generator was intact, just disconnected and powered down. Warren spent 14 straight hours getting it operational, running on stimulants and determination. Blue watched him work with something like concern in his thoughts. The dragon asked if Warren was taking care of himself, if he was eating and sleeping enough. Warren laughed at the irony of a wounded dragon worrying about his health, but he appreciated the sentiment, and he promised to rest once the shield was working. The generator finally powered up on his 15th attempt, and Warren wanted to cry from relief. The shield could cover his entire compound, protecting the workshop and cargo container from orbital weapons and energy attacks. It wouldn't stop everything, but it would buy them time. He anchored the generator in a reinforced bunker and connected it to 3 separate power sources. If the consortium wanted to take down this shield, they would have to work for it. Warren created firing positions throughout the defensive perimeter. He placed weapons at each position, ranging from plasma rifles to old-fashioned explosive launchers. He didn't know if he would have anyone to man these positions, but having options felt better than having nothing. Red learned how to operate the plasma rifles, her claws surprisingly nimble despite their size. Blue preferred more direct approaches, but even he understood the value of ranged weapons. The hover drones were Warren's favorite project. He had found 3 military drones years ago, and had been repairing them slowly as a hobby. Now he accelerated the work, pushing himself to get all 3 functional. The drones weren't large, about the size of a small car, but they were fast and could carry weapons. Warren programmed them with targeting AI and gave them simple instructions. Protect the compound, engage any hostile forces, prioritize threats to the dragons. Goldie helped him test the drones, flying alongside them and playing what looked like tag. The young dragon could actually keep up with the machines, her natural speed impressive even at her age. Warren watched them race through the scrapyard and felt a surge of hope. Maybe they had a chance after all. Maybe this crazy plan would actually work. On the 10th day, Warren gathered everyone in his workshop. The 3 dragons settled around him, their massive forms filling the space but somehow not feeling threatening. Warren looked at each of them and felt a bond he couldn't quite explain. They were family now in the way that mattered most. They had chosen each other, committed to standing together against whatever came next. He showed them the completed defensive plan. The kill zones, the traps, the overlapping weapon systems. He explained his strategy, which was really just controlled chaos and desperate improvisation. They would force the consortium into predictable patterns, hit them from unexpected angles, and make every inch of ground cost them dearly. Red approved of the plan, adding suggestions that made it even better. Blue seemed eager for the fight, his thoughts burning with protective fury. Goldie didn't fully understand everything, but she trusted Warren and her mother completely. That night, Warren allowed himself to relax for the first time in days. He sat outside his workshop looking up at the stars. Red lay beside him and Goldie curled up against his side like an enormous cat. Blue maintained watch from a nearby position, ever vigilant. They didn't talk, didn't share thoughts or stories. They just existed together in comfortable silence. Warren thought about the past 23 years and the loneliness that had defined them. He thought about all the times he had wished for company, for purpose, for something to care about beyond simple survival. Be careful what you wish for, he thought with a tired smile. The universe had given him 3 dragons, a coming war, and the first real happiness he had felt in decades. The sensors would alert them when the consortium arrived. Until then, Warren had done everything he could to prepare. His scrapyard was now a fortress. His broken life now had meaning, and his lonely existence now included a family worth dying for. He reached out and placed his hand on Red's scales, feeling the warmth and strength beneath them. Red's thoughts touched his mind gently. She thanked him again, told him that whatever happened, she was grateful they had found him. Warren sent back his own gratitude for giving him a reason to fight, a reason to live. They sat together under the stars of Dorian's Edge, waiting for the storm that was coming, ready to face it as family. The sensors screamed just after dawn on the 13th day. Warren bolted upright from his bunk, his heart already racing before his mind fully processed what was happening. He ran to the monitoring station in his workshop, his old legs moving faster than they had in years. 5 ships had just emerged from slipspace above Dorian's Edge, their signatures unmistakable on his sensors. The consortium had found them. Red appeared beside him, her thoughts sharp and focused. She had felt them coming before the sensors detected them, some instinct warning her of approaching danger. Blue moved into defensive position near the cargo container where Goldie waited, the young dragon's eyes wide with fear but determined to be brave. Warren activated all his defensive systems with shaking hands, watching screens light up across his workbench. The consortium ships were sleek and predatory, designed specifically for hunting living targets. Warren's sensors showed weapons, tractor beams, and containment systems far more advanced than anything he possessed. A transmission came through on all frequencies, the voice cold and professional. Overseer Dalvin introduced himself and demanded the immediate surrender of the stolen property, by which he meant the dragons. Warren grabbed his communication headset and replied with 2 words that would have made his old military buddies proud. The profanity echoed across the channel before he cut the connection. Red made a sound that might have been a laugh, her thoughts approving of his response. Blue's mental voice was equally amused, noting that humans apparently had very creative insults. The consortium fleet scanned the scrapyard from orbit. Warren watched their sensors sweep across his position, detecting the dragons but clearly underestimating everything else. They saw an old man and 3 wounded creatures, not the trap he had spent 10 days preparing. That mistake would cost them. 30 mercenaries landed in drop pods on the northern edge of the scrapyard. They wore powered armor and carried weapons designed to stun and capture rather than kill. Warren watched them on his cameras as they formed up and began advancing toward his compound. They moved with professional efficiency, clearly experienced at retrieving escaped specimens. They expected frightened prey trying to run. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Warren let them push deep into the scrapyard, watching their progress on his screens. They passed the first sensor line, then the second. He waited until they reached the kill zone he had prepared, a section of the scrapyard where debris created a natural funnel. Then he pressed a button on his console and unleashed hell. The minefield activated first. Explosions erupted throughout the consortium formation, the mines responding to the weight and movement of armored soldiers. Half the mercenaries went down in the first 3 seconds, their armor cracked and systems failing. The survivors scattered, trying to find cover, and that's when the automated turrets opened fire. Warren had positioned the turrets to create overlapping fields of fire with no safe zones. Plasma bolts tore through the scrapyard, targeting anything that moved with the armor signature the mercenaries wore. The consortium soldiers returned fire, but they were shooting at automated systems that didn't care about suppression or fear. 3 more mercenaries fell before they managed to destroy the first turret. Red launched from her hiding position behind a crashed freighter. Her wing was still weak, but she could glide short distances now, and short was all she needed. She came down on top of a containment unit the mercenaries had brought, her claws tearing through the metal like paper. Fire erupted from her mouth, not the careful, controlled flame she used for welding, but a proper dragon's breath that turned armor into slag. The mercenaries panicked. They had trained to capture fleeing animals, not fight an organized defense led by an angry dragon. They tried to regroup, but Blue hit them from a completely different angle. The male dragon burst through a pile of scrap metal, his injured shoulder clearly not slowing him down anymore. He scattered the soldiers like toys, his tail sweeping 3 of them off their feet while his claws disabled 2 more. Warren controlled his hover drones from the workshop, sending them into the fight like angry metal wasps. They strafed the mercenary positions, firing plasma bolts and launching small missiles. 1 drone took heavy fire and went down, but not before taking out another containment field generator. The remaining 2 drones continued their attack patterns, hurting the mercenaries exactly where Warren wanted them. Goldie followed the plan Warren had drilled into her, using hit-and-run tactics that suited her smaller size and greater speed. She would appear from behind cover, breathe fire at a target, then disappear before they could effectively return fire. The mercenaries couldn't track her, couldn't predict where she would strike next. She was learning fast, using the scrapyard terrain like she had been born there. Warren contributed his own part, remotely activating electromagnetic pulses that fried the mercenaries' advanced weapon systems. Their plasma rifles shut down, their armor's powered servos locked up, and their communication network collapsed. Suddenly they were just soldiers in expensive metal suits, cut off from their support and surrounded by enemies. The surviving mercenaries retreated in disorder, running back toward their drop pods. Warren let them go. He had made his point, shown the consortium that this wouldn't be easy. Red wanted to pursue, but Warren urged restraint through their mental connection. Save their strength for the next wave, because there would definitely be a next wave. The consortium didn't disappoint. Overseer Dalvin sent down his elite capture team, the specialist reserved for particularly dangerous specimens. They arrived in armored vehicles with heavy weapons and a portable containment field generator that could theoretically hold even a dragon. These weren't the standard mercenaries. These were professionals who had captured hundreds of rare creatures across the galaxy. Warren watched them approach with growing concern. His traps were expended, his mines already triggered. The elite team moved carefully, scanning for threats and advancing with tactical precision. They had learned from the first wave's mistakes. They were ready for resistance now. The battle shifted as the elite team engaged. Their plasma cannons tore through Warren's defensive positions, destroying a second turret and creating gaps in his coverage. They brought portable shield generators that absorbed the hover drone's attacks. They used sonic weapons that disoriented the dragons, making it hard for them to coordinate. Blue charged the containment field generator, recognizing it as the primary threat. He made it halfway before a plasma bolt caught him in his already wounded shoulder. The impact sent him crashing into a pile of debris, and Warren felt the dragon's pain echo through their mental connection. Red roared and dove toward her brother, but the sonic weapons drove her back, the sound waves disrupting her ability to fly. Goldie, seeing her family in trouble, did something brave and foolish. She flew directly at the plasma cannon crews, drawing their fire away from the adults. The young dragon was fast enough to avoid the first few shots, but not fast enough to avoid them all. A plasma bolt clipped her wing and she tumbled out of the sky, crashing hard into the ground. Warren felt his heart stop. Goldie wasn't moving and Red was screaming, a sound of pure rage and grief that shook the entire scrapyard. Blue struggled to stand despite his wound, determined to protect his niece. The consortium soldiers advanced, sensing victory, their containment field generator powering up. Warren made a decision. He grabbed every explosive he had left in his workshop and loaded them into a pack. He strapped his plasma rifle across his back and ran out the door, moving faster than his old body should have been able to move. His plan was simple and stupid, exactly the kind of thing he would have yelled at a younger soldier for attempting. He was going to take out that generator himself. The scrapyard became a blur as Warren ran. He used cover instinctively, muscle memory from a war 40 years ago taking over. He threw a smoke grenade to obscure the consortium's view, then fired his plasma rifle at anything that looked like a target. He wasn't trying to hit anyone, just create confusion and draw attention away from the dragons. He reached the containment field generator and armed all his explosives at once, setting the timer for 30 seconds. Then he turned to run to get clear of the blast radius before everything exploded. He made it 3 steps before a plasma bolt hit his leg. Pain exploded through Warren's body and he went down hard. His vision blurred and he tasted blood in his mouth. Through failing consciousness, Warren saw Goldie move. The young dragon wasn't dead, just stunned. She saw Warren fall and seemed to make a decision. Despite her injured wing, despite her mother's mental commands to stay down, Goldie launched herself toward Warren. She grabbed him in her claws, her scales covering his body just as the explosives detonated. The blast wave was enormous. The containment field generator disintegrated, taking half the elite team with it. Goldie's body shielded Warren from the worst of it, her scales absorbing heat and shrapnel that would have killed him instantly. They tumbled across the ground, ending up in a heap near Red's position. With the containment field gone, Red and Blue unleashed everything they had held back. Red's fire turned the battlefield into an inferno, and Blue's rage-fueled assault scattered the remaining soldiers. The elite team broke and ran, their professional composure shattered by the ferocity of 2 adult dragons with nothing left to lose. The consortium vehicles retreated, and the immediate threat ended. But Warren, lying in Goldie's protective embrace, knew this was far from over. He looked up at the sky where the 5 consortium ships waited in orbit. Through his fading consciousness, he heard Overseer Dalvin's transmission, giving them 1 hour before orbital bombardment would begin. Warren tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. He had won the battle but lost the war. The consortium would simply destroy the entire scrapyard from orbit, killing everything on the ground. Red pressed her thoughts into his mind, saying they wouldn't leave him, that they would face the end together. Warren wanted to argue, but he didn't have the strength. He had saved the dragons only to doom them all. Warren lay in his bunker while Goldie and Red worked to stabilize his wounds. The plasma bolt had burned through his leg, and he had lost a lot of blood. His vision kept fading in and out, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Blue stood guard at the entrance, his thoughts radiating protective fury toward anything that might approach. 1 hour. That's what Overseer Dalvin had given them before the orbital bombardment would begin. Warren looked around his bunker at the 3 dragons who refused to abandon him. Red pressed bandages against his leg wound, her massive claws somehow gentle enough not to cause further damage. Goldie curled against his side, her wing splinted with materials from Warren's medical kit. Blue's mental voice kept asking what they should do, how they should fight ships in orbit when they couldn't even fly yet. Warren knew there was nothing they could do. The consortium would rain fire from the sky, and they would all die together in this scrapyard that had been his home for 23 years. It seemed fitting somehow that his lonely existence would end surrounded by the only family he had found in all that time. But Warren Briggs had been a soldier once, and soldiers didn't give up without trying something, even if that something was pointless. He dragged himself to his communication console and activated his long-range emergency beacon. He hadn't used the beacon in 23 years. Hadn't even tested it to see if it still worked. But he powered it up now and began broadcasting on every frequency he could access. He told the story as clearly as his fading consciousness would allow. He described the consortium and their hunting practices, the 3 dragons who had crashed on his world, the battle they had fought together. He explained that the consortium was about to destroy them all from orbit, and that nobody would probably ever know what had happened here. He wasn't asking for help because help couldn't possibly arrive in time. He just wanted someone to know, wanted someone to remember. Red asked him why he wasted his last hour on a message nobody would answer. Warren tried to explain about human nature, about how humans needed to tell stories to bear witness, to leave some mark that they had existed, even if nobody came, even if the message just disappeared into empty space. At least he had tried. That meant something to him. The first response came 3 minutes later. A mining colony 3 systems away acknowledged receipt of his transmission. A cargo hauler changed course and said they were coming, even though they were too far away to arrive in time. A retired military cruiser requested his exact coordinates. Warren stared at his screen in disbelief. People were answering. Ships were actually responding to his desperate message. Within 10 minutes, 17 vessels had altered course toward Dorian's Edge. They weren't military ships or rescue fleets. They were cargo haulers and mining transports and independent traders. They were humans who had heard another human calling for help and decided to do something about it. Warren felt tears running down his face, and he didn't bother trying to wipe them away. Red felt his emotions through their mental connection and became fascinated. She asked him why water leaked from his eyes, why his body reacted this way to other humans responding to his message. Warren tried to explain about hope and community, and the fundamental human refusal to let someone die alone when they could do something about it. He wasn't sure his explanation made sense, but Red seemed to understand something important. The consortium fleet detected the approaching human ships and delayed the orbital bombardment. Overseer Dalvin contacted the incoming vessels and warned them to stay away. He explained that the dragons were consortium property, legally acquired specimens, and that interfering would be considered an act of aggression. Warren listened to the transmission and felt his fading hope flicker. Then Captain Ann Redding of the cargo hauler Steady Hand responded. Her voice was calm and cold as she told Overseer Dalvin that humans didn't recognize property rights over sentient beings. She informed him that he had just made the mistake of threatening an old man who asked for help, and that threatening one human tended to make all the other humans take it personally. She suggested he reconsider his position. More ships continued to arrive, emerging from slipspace around Dorian's Edge. 20 vessels now, then 25, then 30. They took up positions around the planet, creating a defensive perimeter between the consortium fleet and Warren's scrapyard. The ships were outgunned and outclassed by the consortium hunters, but they didn't back down. They formed up in a ragged line and powered their weapons, ready to fight. Warren watched this impossible rescue unfold on his screens and couldn't speak. He had spent 23 years alone, convinced that nobody cared whether he lived or died. Now 36 ships had risked everything to defend him, and 3 dragons they had never met. Blue asked him how this was possible, how these humans could care about strangers. Warren didn't have a good answer except that this was what humans did. They pack-bonded with anyone who needed help, and they defended their pack. Overseer Dalvin found himself in an unexpected situation. He had authorization to engage the human ships if necessary, but his mission was supposed to be simple retrieval, not a military confrontation. His superiors contacted him and ran calculations. 5 consortium hunters versus 37 human vessels. The consortium would probably win, but it would be costly and it would draw attention. Human governments might start investigating their operations more closely. Dalvin tried negotiation. He offered to let the human ships leave unharmed if Warren surrendered the dragons. His voice was smooth and reasonable, explaining that this was all a misunderstanding, that the dragons were dangerous creatures who needed proper containment for everyone's safety. Warren listened to the lies and felt his anger burn through the pain and exhaustion. Red asked if Warren would accept the deal, if he would trade the dragons for the safety of the humans who had come to help. Her thoughts were resigned, ready to sacrifice herself if it meant saving Warren and the others. Warren told her to shut up and let him handle the negotiation. Then he opened a channel to Overseer Dalvin and made his own offer. The consortium could leave the system peacefully, or Warren would make sure every human settlement in known space learned about their hunting practices. Dalvin laughed and asked what one old mechanic's testimony could possibly accomplish. Warren smiled despite the pain and revealed his ace. He had been recording everything since the dragons crashed. Every battle, every conversation, every consortium transmission. He had uploaded the recordings to every ship in range with instructions to spread them across human space. The consortium's hunting operations relied on secrecy and plausible deniability. Warren had just made it public. The transmission went silent. Warren could imagine the calculations happening on the consortium command ship, the cost-benefit analysis of pursuing 3 dragons versus the damage to their operations if humans started sharing information about their hunting practices. Minutes stretched out while everyone waited for the response. Captain Redding contacted Warren directly, asking about his injuries and whether he needed immediate medical assistance. She told him that several ships in the fleet had medical personnel who could treat him once the situation resolved. Warren thanked her and asked why she had come. She paused before answering, then said that she had a grandfather who died alone on some forgotten colony world, and nobody had been there to help him. She couldn't help her grandfather, but she could help Warren. Other captains began sharing similar stories. Someone who lost a brother serving on an isolated station, someone whose sister died during a mining accident with no support, someone who just thought it was the right thing to do. Warren listened to these strangers explain why they had risked their ships and their lives for someone they had never met, and he finally understood something about humanity he had forgotten during his years of isolation. Humans were pack animals. They formed bonds and defended their pack members, even if those members were strangers who just needed help. It was irrational and dangerous and completely impractical, but it was also the thing that made humans special in a galaxy full of practical and logical species. They cared even when caring made no sense. Overseer Dalvin's response finally came through. The consortium fleet was withdrawing from the system. He promised that this wasn't over, that the consortium would remember this interference. Warren told him that humans would remember too, and humans were really good at holding grudges. The 5 consortium ships powered down their weapons and moved away from Dorian's edge. Within minutes, they had entered slipspace and disappeared. The human fleet erupted in celebration. Ships broadcast congratulations and relief across all channels. Captain Redding requested permission to land and deliver medical supplies to Warren. Several other ships asked if they could help with repairs or provide additional support. Warren tried to respond but found he couldn't form words anymore. His vision was fading and his body felt very cold. Red's thoughts pressed urgently against his mind, calling him back, refusing to let him slip away. She told him he couldn't die now, not after bringing all these humans together, not after winning the impossible fight. Warren wanted to argue that he was just an old mechanic who got lucky, but he didn't have the energy. He felt Goldie press against him, her warmth helping fight the cold. Blue's mental voice joined Red's, both dragons demanding that their human family members stay conscious. The last thing Warren remembered before passing out was Captain Redding's voice, promising that help was landing now, that he just needed to hold on a little longer. He felt the dragon's thoughts surrounding him like a protective blanket, keeping him anchored to consciousness. And for the first time in 23 years, Warren Briggs fell asleep knowing that he wasn't alone, that people cared whether he lived or died, and that family came in many different forms. Warren woke up 3 days later in a proper medical bay. The ceiling above him was clean white panels instead of rusted metal, and the air smelled sterile instead of like oil and dust. For a confused moment, he thought he might be dead, and this was whatever came after. Then pain shot through his leg, and he decided that death probably didn't hurt this much. His leg was encased in a regeneration unit, pale blue light pulsing through the transparent material. Medical equipment beeped steadily around him, monitoring vitals he hadn't bothered checking in years. A proper IV line fed medication and fluids into his arm. Someone had cleaned him up and put him in a hospital gown, which meant someone had seen exactly how old and broken his body really was. That thought embarrassed him more than it probably should. A sound near his bed made Warren turn his head. Goldie lay curled up on the floor beside him, her golden scales reflecting the medical equipment lights. Her eyes were closed, but Warren could feel her thoughts hovering at the edge of his awareness, keeping watch even while she rested. The young dragon had refused to leave his side, according to the feelings he picked up from her sleeping mind. Warren tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, and his head spun badly enough that he had to lie back down. A woman in medical scrubs appeared in his field of vision, checking his monitors with professional efficiency. She introduced herself as Dr. Williams from the cargo hauler Steady Hand. She told him he had been in shock from blood loss when they found him, and that his leg wound had been dangerously infected. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical questions and examinations. Dr. Williams explained that they had set up a temporary medical facility in one of Warren's converted cargo containers, bringing in equipment from several of the ships that had responded to his distress call. 23 vessels remained in orbit around Dorian's edge, and more kept arriving every day. Word about the standoff with the consortium had spread quickly through human space. Red and Blue visited once the doctor cleared them to enter. The two adult dragons barely fit in the medical bay, but they squeezed inside anyway, their thoughts flooding Warren's mind with relief and concern. Red called him foolish for nearly dying, while Blue's mental voice carried a warmth that suggested the male dragon had become genuinely attached to their strange human. Warren assured them he was fine, just old and slow, nothing that wouldn't heal given time. Captain Anne Redding arrived later that afternoon. She was younger than Warren expected, maybe 40 years old with gray streaking through her dark hair. She sat beside his bed and told him about everything that had happened while he was unconscious. His recording had spread across human space like wildfire. News outlets were broadcasting the story of the old mechanic and 3 dragons who stood against an imperial hunting fleet. Multiple human governments had opened investigations into consortium activities. More importantly, humans were angry. They had learned about the consortium's practice of capturing and harvesting rare species, and they didn't like it. Several colonies had already banned consortium ships from their space. Trading companies were refusing to do business with anyone connected to the hunting operations. The dragon's plight had become a cause that united humans across political and cultural boundaries. Warren had accidentally started a movement. Warren insisted this was all a mistake, that he had just been trying to help 3 wounded creatures and survive the consequences. Captain Redding smiled and told him that was exactly why the story resonated with people. He hadn't set out to be a hero or make a statement. He had just done what seemed right, and sometimes that was all it took to change things. Over the following weeks, Warren's scrapyard transformed into something he barely recognized. Ships continued arriving, bringing construction materials and equipment. Engineers and volunteers worked alongside the dragons to build proper structures, replacing Warren's cobbled-together shelters with real buildings. The scrapyard evolved from a graveyard of forgotten things into a living settlement. The dragons healed alongside Warren. Red's wing regained full function, and she could fly again for the first time since the crash. She tested her abilities carefully at first, then with increasing confidence, soaring over the scrapyard in wide circles. Blue's shoulder finally finished healing, the plasma wound closing completely. Goldie grew noticeably during the recovery period, her scales brightening and her confidence increasing as her body finished fighting off the internal injuries. New arrivals came seeking sanctuary. Refugees from oppressive systems, outcasts looking for fresh starts, people who had heard about the place where an old man and 3 dragons had defied an empire. Warren found himself becoming a leader despite his protests and complete lack of qualification. He tried to explain that he was just a mechanic, but people seemed to think that made him exactly the right person to lead a community of misfits. They named the settlement Final Stand, half as a joke and half as a promise. It represented the place where they drew a line and refused to back down against exploitation and cruelty. The name stuck, and within 3 months, Final Stand had 200 permanent residents. They built homes from salvaged materials and Warren's extensive collection of scrap. They created farms in the areas where the soil wasn't too contaminated. They established workshops and schools in communal spaces. The dragons became protectors and symbols of the community. Red and Blue scouted the surrounding systems, helping other hunted species find their way to Final Stand. They learned human language and customs, becoming ambassadors between species. Goldie appointed herself Warren's personal guardian, following him everywhere and using her growing size to intimidate anyone who might threaten him. Warren found this both touching and slightly absurd, but he didn't have the heart to discourage her. 6 months after the battle, a ship arrived carrying a passenger Warren never expected to see again. His daughter Patricia stepped off the landing ramp, 45 years old and looking so much like her mother that Warren's heart ached. She ran to him and hugged him hard enough to make his ribs creak, crying and yelling at him for making her worry. Patricia explained that she had been trying to reach him for years. Her messages had gotten lost in bureaucratic systems, routing errors sending them to wrong addresses or deleted as spam. She had heard about the battle with the consortium and immediately chartered transport to Dorian's Edge. She had thought he was dead, had spent years mourning him, and now he was alive and apparently leading a community of refugees with 3 dragons as his family. Warren introduced Patricia to Red, Blue, and Goldie, His daughter handled meeting dragons with remarkable composure, though her hands shook slightly when Red's thoughts first touched her mind. Goldie immediately bonded with Patricia, much to Warren's amusement. The young dragon followed his daughter around exactly the way she followed Warren, apparently deciding that family was family regardless of specific bloodlines. Patricia stayed. She helped organize the growing community, using administrative skills from her corporate job to create systems and structures that Final Stand desperately needed. She argued with Warren constantly about his tendency to overwork himself, to take on too many repairs personally, to forget that he was nearly 70 and needed to rest sometimes. Warren ignored most of her advice, but he appreciated having someone who cared enough to nag him. The settlement continued growing. Engineers repaired and restored salvage, creating a trading post that attracted merchants from across the sector. Final Stand became known as a place where you could find rare parts, get repairs done cheaply, and trade without asking too many questions about origins or destinations. The community thrived through a combination of hard work, practical skills, and the protection of 3 dragons who had very strong opinions about anyone threatening their home. Warren received messages from beings he had never met. Other refugees thanked him for showing that resistance was possible, that standing up to imperial powers didn't always end in defeat. Several small colonies formed defensive alliances inspired by how human ships had rallied to protect Final Stand. A movement was growing across the frontier, species cooperating to resist exploitation by larger powers. Warren insisted he wasn't responsible for any of this, but people seemed to think otherwise. He learned that his actions had inspired similar resistance in ways he never anticipated. Human settlements were forming partnerships with non-human species, sharing resources and protection. The consortium found their operations disrupted at every turn, as communities refused to cooperate with their hunters. Several other imperial powers had quietly scaled back their own exploitation programs, worried that they might face similar resistance. One old mechanic had shown that empires built on fear could be challenged, and the galaxy was still absorbing that lesson. Despite all the changes, Warren still found time for quiet moments. He walked the scrapyard in early mornings before the community woke up, Goldie walking beside him in comfortable silence. They didn't always share thoughts or conversation. Sometimes they just existed together, appreciating the peace. Warren thought about how 3 falling stars had changed everything, how loneliness had almost destroyed him, but compassion had saved him. Late one evening, Warren sat outside his rebuilt workshop, looking up at the stars. Patricia joined him, bringing tea that was actually hot for once. Red and Blue landed nearby, settling into their favorite resting spots. Goldie curled up on Warren's other side, her head resting on his lap. They sat together as a family, watching ships come and go from the settlement that had grown around them. Patricia asked Warren if he had any regrets. He thought about the question carefully. He regretted the years he spent isolated and bitter, cutting himself off from human connection. He regretted not trying harder to maintain contact with his daughter. But he didn't regret staying on Dorian's edge, because staying had put him in position to help 3 dragons who desperately needed someone to choose them over safety and comfort. Red's thoughts touched his mind gently. She told him that dragons had a concept called heartfire, the inner strength that defined a person's true nature. She said Warren's heartfire burned brighter than any dragon she had ever known, human or otherwise. Warren appreciated the sentiment, but he thought she was giving him too much credit. He had just done what needed doing, nothing special or heroic about it. Blue's mental voice disagreed. The male dragon pointed out that choosing to act was exactly what made Warren special. Most beings saw problems and looked away, found reasons why it wasn't their responsibility or wasn't worth the risk. Warren had seen 3 dying creatures and decided to save them despite every logical reason to walk away. That choice had changed everything. Goldie added her own thoughts, simpler and more direct than the adults. She said Warren was family, and family took care of each other. That was the whole point, the only thing that really mattered. Warren smiled and scratched behind the young dragon's horns, the spot that made her purr like an enormous cat. A new ship appeared on the horizon, its running lights blinking in the standard pattern that requested permission to land. Warren stood up, his joints creaking in familiar complaint. Another refugee seeking sanctuary, another lost soul looking for a place where they could be safe. He reached for his tool belt, ancient habit making him prepare for work even though he had plenty of people who could handle new arrivals now. Patricia rolled her eyes and told him he was supposed to be retired. Warren laughed and reminded her that he had spent 23 years doing nothing. He had a lot of lost time to make up for. Red's thoughts carried amusement, asking if he was ready to welcome another addition to their strange community. Warren nodded and started walking toward the landing pad. The dragons followed him, and Patricia came along despite her protests that he should rest. They moved together as a unit, a family defined not by blood or species but by choice and commitment. The scrapyard hummed with life around them, full of people and activity and purpose. Warren Briggs had come to Dorian's Edge to slowly die in isolation. Instead, he had found the family he thought he lost forever and built something worth defending. The new ship landed, and Warren waited to greet whoever stepped out. He was just getting started, he thought. There was still so much work to do, so many people who needed help, so many reasons to keep going. The lonely old mechanic wasn't lonely anymore, and that made all the difference.